Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega, Trick Slattery, and David Joseph. And this is our 50th episode, so it's kind of a special podcast. And I wanted to quickly mention, and I need to be in the habit of mentioning that we're looking for new co-hosts, guests. If you don't want to be a regular co-host but just want to be a guest and try and either explain why free will is an illusion, or you're a free will believer and you think that we're all totally wrong, then you can debate us, I guess. So that's cool. And let's see, let's see. I forgot what George mentioned our topic was gonna
Uh,
be.
let's start out with Trick's recent blog post about, it's 10 reasons why people don't either, I guess, accept or understand that free will is an illusion.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
great idea. So Trick, yeah, I read that blog post he did. Trick, did you want to read it for us since you wrote it? You'd want to like read each one of them off to us and we could discuss them or something like that?
sure, we could do that. Yeah, the blog post was 10 reasons why people can't let go of their free will belief. So, just, and it's not, I kind of preface in the middle or in the beginning of it that it wasn't the end all to be all of reasons. There's a whole lot of reasons, religious reasons and things like that. These are just some of the ones that I've, seen. So, the first one is, and we'll just go one at a time, I guess, through these. Deeply ingrained free will belief. And basically, I said since the belief in free will is something that we kind of intuit, a lot of people intuit naturally, that these abilities are reinforced by others, that such a free will psychology is something that becomes deeply ingrained in brains at an early age, and it's that um, deep psychological belief that something that is hard to get by because it's so ingrained in one's psyche, basically. So, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, what's interesting about this Trick is that maybe I don't necessarily think like I guess for me it was religiously deeply ingrained, and yet I guess I sort of had that awareness that even if I do something, well, there's a reason or cause why I do it. So, but for maybe some people, that's how they look at it. Maybe that's how their brain works. They just think, well, I did this, and they think that it was totally their idea that they came up with.
Right. Well,
yeah.
for me, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Now,
George.
well, yeah, Trick, I'm not sure that it's completely intuited because, like, for example, the Greeks, they had words for fate and destiny, but they didn't have a word for either will or free will. And they tended to believe in the fates. And then also, like, there was a New Scientist magazine article in 2012 reported that about 30% of the world doesn't believe in free will. So my guess is that to a great extent it's actually taught to children at a very, very early age.
Right, right, and that's part of what ingrains it is and I put that in there as well, that it's also reinforced by others. But I do think that at least for me, just the ability to see the three or more options or something like that, and then make an assessment between all these options and taking one, it does just intuitively lead to the idea that I could have actually chosen those other ones, even though it's obviously wrong. So that's what I meant by that. But
That's true. Yeah, I see
Yeah,
that.
well, and what's kind of interesting is here's the way I look at it is, well, you could have done otherwise if you had wanted to. But that's the whole catch to it. You didn't want to, so you couldn't have because you would have. How would you have chosen to want to? Because you would have to want. Infinite
right,
mess.
yeah, no one really, and that's the thing is people don't really assess that the fact of how they wanted something. So they just see the fact that there was options in front of them and they assessed all three of those options. So they don't really understand that something actually drives to the specific option.
Well, yeah.
What about you? What about you, David?
Yeah, with me, it's very much like you say. From a very young age, I feel like it was just something that it's just kind of normal, to believe in free will. It's nothing that anyone really talks about or tries to explain to you. You just have the idea kind of thrust onto you, and you go with it. And I guess it's a lot like religion in some ways. People are raised in environments where they're taught to believe in a God, and they grow up, and that's constantly reinforced, and it's not really questioned, I think.
Yeah, I think that's mostly it, David, is that it's something that we're kind of taught, but we don't question it. Just like I question the existence of God and I question whether it was right for us to be eating other animals. But most people don't question that, and if they don't question it, well, they just keep going with whatever their culture teaches them.
You know where I think it first comes up? Imagine yourself as a toddler, let's say 3, 4 years old, and you do something wrong, and you tell your parents, I couldn't help it. It wasn't my fault, right? And so, like, the parents will tell them, "Oh, yes, it was. You could have. And they may not use the term free will with a toddler, but I have a feeling that that might be the first kind of experience where kids learn, "Uh-oh, I'm being held responsible for all this."
Right, and the parents are totally wrong, and the child is right in this case, but because the parents are the big people, the authority figure who will punish them, that what happens is they just kind of tend to just go along. Oh, I guess my parents are right because they're big, or something like
That
that.
that actually makes a lot of sense. In that study that you mentioned, George, about 30% of people not believing in free will, were they all under the age of 3?
Oh, that's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of weird. It's sort of like yeah, little kids, I think, are capable of getting concepts that most people are brainwashed to believing concepts, and kids know that though they don't believe in those things. Newborns don't believe in God. They don't necessarily believe in free will or anything like that. They also don't contemplate like, oh, is there life after death? They don't even know about death, and so because they don't know, they're new to the world. There's all these crazy things that people are taught to believe by religion and school that these babies, they haven't been corrupted yet.
I hear you.
All right, so let's go on to number 2 here. Number 2 is egotism. Basically, an excessive sense of self-importance can cloud a person's judgment about whether or not they're the true authors of their actions. So it's this desire to be the author of something great you've done that kind of leads to the rejection or denial of free will. What do you guys think about that one?
I think that's very important. Yeah, because that's and also that's one of the greatest harms of free will belief. We build up this sense of ego, and that will lead to like arrogance. Will lead to demeaning others and all, to this crazy competition between people. God, yeah.
Oh yeah. And here's the deal. Like, some people, I think, are naturally more ego driven than other people. And here's what I mean is that some people who have less empathy, psychopaths and stuff, well, they're all focused on what they want. And so they're focused on themselves. And what I think this does is this causes them to be unaware of how other people have contributed to what they are doing. So so egotistic people become ignorant of the causes behind their behavior, and they would rather remain that way because they want to feel like they did it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think in that sense it kind of touches on your first one as well. It's like it's kind of like good for us to not believe in free will in a way.
Yeah, and in fact, when I count these down, a lot of these kind of interplay with each other. You'll notice when I get to the third one that you guys already started talking about the third one, basically because of the first one. So they all kind of interplay, but they're different in little ways. So
Yeah.
So number 3 is. Oh, are we ready for number 3? Are you?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Number 3, a psychological need to blame others. So we kind of delved into this a little bit when we were talking about the ingrained belief of free will. it's basically something that's taught at an early age. So we're talking about that how we blame our children, and then our children blame their children. So this kind of role of blaming others is kind of embedded at an early age, and then people have a psychological need to do that. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that that one is kind of like necessary in a sense. In other words, like, whether it's raising toddlers or, let's say you have tribal societies and you have, occasional tribal conflicts, whatever, that I think there has to be kind of like a concept of accountability. And so like, so I don't think they ever, delve into it in terms of like whether the blame is due to a fundamental, free will that's, whatever. But I think that, yeah, that concept has some utility in terms of like, again, the way we describe it is not actually blaming as, holding fundamentally accountable, but like pragmatically.
Right. It definitely could have had like some kind of evolutionary advantage as well. There's a lot of reasons why we come to the conclusion that, we want to blame people. But what tends to happen is when people hear that there's no free will, all of a sudden they think, oh, then we can't blame people, and this concerns them. They say, it brings it back to their psychological state that they need to blame for these proper things to happen. So and that causes a rejection. So that's why I put that in there. What do you think,
Yeah.
Chandler?
Yeah, well, this need to blame someone is kind of interesting because I've sort of, over time, after transcending the illusion of free will, I've sort of lost that psychological need to blame. But for people who are looking for someone to blame, it seems like it's easy for them to just blame somebody, even somebody who had nothing to do with the situation, like a scapegoat or something, and so for some people, until they lose the psychological need to blame, because I think you can lose that idea when you realize it's not helpful. But like I used to blame God. I used back when I thought I was Christian. Like I would blame God for humans having different languages because he confused the languages of the Tower of Babel. So I told God he was an idiot. I used to do that kind of stuff and blame God for everything. And that worked back then until I became atheist, and now I have to blame the universe or the infinite regress.
Right. So just one last point about this. Basically, what we're trying to teach the world is that there's a distinction. It's subtle, but it's important between blaming and holding accountable.
Yeah. I'm not clear on the difference there, George.
Well, basically, blaming means like they, of their free will, did whatever they did. Hold accountable is they're like kind of like the proximate agent. They're like, if something happens and a person does something wrong, in terms of society, we have to like direct our actions toward that person. They're pragmatically accountable. There's a certain amount of accountability because, if let's say they're doing something threatening to society, the change would have to come through them. Again, we're not blaming them for who they are or what they did, but we're still saying that, like, that the problem has to be addressed through them, so they're identified.
A good example I would give is, like, let's say that somebody is working for some company and they're rude to the customers, and so the customers complain and they lose business because there's a rude employee. Well, even though you don't blame that employee because they're not fundamentally responsible for anything without a free will, but you still have to fire them or correct them or something, their behavior, because otherwise that hurts the business. So yeah, I guess hold them accountable, like, well, we've identified the bug in the program, let's fix it. I think that. Yeah.
It's mainly for the sake of utility, for either deterrence or something like that. But it's not really blaming what they did, but it's putting something on them for the sake of a future output, basically. So
yeah,
if we don't want that to reoccur, we have to kind of interact in a way that doesn't reoccur. So
Right. So it's about fixing the problem rather than punishing somebody because they deserve it, basically.
right, which leads us into actually, David, do you have anything to say on that?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that in my experience, when people bring up this this idea of blame, they usually throw choice in there as well, and by choice they usually mean free choice, not an influence choice like we might mean. So for me, I try to explain it in a way that just says that for every action we do, there's going to be a consequence. So instead of a choice between turning left and right, you just say the person turned right or the person went this way. And you know, you're just trying to convey an action that happened rather than saying that they made a free choice, because sometimes people get confused. They can't seem to separate a choice from a free choice.
That's excellent. Yeah, in other words, like we try to do the right thing, not because we have a free will, but because, as you're saying, like there are consequences to what we would do or not do.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and see, here's the interesting thing. Yeah, I want to respond to what David said there because I have tried very difficult. If I can write a sentence or say a sentence without using the word choice, I do so. Because choice, as it was always taught to me and always used by other people, choice meant free choice. Choice meant you could have done otherwise. You had a choice and you chose wrong, you bad sinner, you know? So that's how choice was always taught to me. And so by choice means free choice in the minds of people. So I like to not use the word.
All right, let's move on to the next one, which pretty much relates to the one we were just talking about, and we were kind of getting into that a little. The desire for retributivism. So basically, what I put in there is that we watch movies, we read books, and things like that, and we always watch how the good guy gets revenge on the bad guy, how the bad guy gets what he deserves, quote unquote.
Oh yeah.
In some sense. So we build up this thing where we this psyche where we have a desire for retributive action. We have a desire to see somebody who did something bad get the same. It's called an eye for an eye mentality. So we have this desire for that. So this is another thing that people when they have this psyche, kind of reject the whole notion of that we don't have free will because they want to be able to enforce such retributivism onto people rather than rehabilitation or things like that.
Yeah.
This is actually something we touched on yesterday in the podcast that again has a practical application, and it has cultural origin. In other words, like there are people that developed from herding societies and people who developed from farming societies. With herders, you know, it was found that like you actually, like if somebody stole your sheep or something, you had to exact revenge. You had to get the person whatever, otherwise people would feel that you're weak and they can like steal your sheep and stuff. Whereas like with farming societies, they didn't have that concern. So that's one reason why how sociologists account for like the reason some people, you know, really seek revenge and retribution while others don't. So there's, you know, the free will belief certainly plays into that. But again, that's another example of a kind of like utilitarian or practical reason why people would want to like aggress against someone who isn't really fundamentally responsible.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about this whole deserving thing is that that's, you know, the cartoons, the anime I would watch and stuff would have that concept like, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, and the good guys are right to punish the wicked for what they deserve. And so that message is in so much media that I used to think of in terms of that. And I thought, well, this person deserves to suffer, you know, for what they did. Realizing, of course, that I didn't choose to be a revengeful person, but I had been brainwashed into that the same way I'd been brainwashed into free will belief and God and all that.
David, anything?
Yeah, I mean, you know, going back to my childhood, when I'd watch things like He-Man, Transformers, pretty much anything, they always used to end up just basically kicking the crap out of the bad guy. That's how they won. So yeah, I can see where that mentality would come from, definitely.
All right. So that was number 4, desire for retributivism. Number 5 is the need to be in control. The feeling that one isn't entirely in control of themselves can, I think, in some ways repulse people. And so it's this control mentality leads to the rejection of free will. What do you think?
Yeah, the note, like the word control, has a very interesting meaning in our modern society. I actually dislike the word control, so maybe that's part of why it was easier to overcome the free will belief, because, control usually, like the way it's always been used to me has been to destroy something. Population control, birth control. In other words, and when they talk about self-control, for example, they talk about not doing what you want to do. You want to do this, but control yourself and don't act on your desires. So in other words, control means doing the opposite of what you want to do. So control was kind of stupid to me in my life, how I looked at it.
Yeah, from my research on happiness, and Chandler, you want to like delete this part and all, but we got like 5 more to go, so we got to like, we've got like 9 minutes, so we want to kind of like get really focused. All right, so back to basically from my happiness research, there's 4 personality traits that are most correlated with happiness, and locus of control, feeling that one is in control of their life, is one of them. So that definitely explains why people would want to feel in control, regardless of its illusionary nature.
Actually, that's very good, actually, George. In fact, I'm wondering, since there's still more points, should we extend the length of this episode so that Trick can get finished with all?
Excellent idea. Excellent idea.
Yes, we should do that. So,
so you want to keep going with a longer episode, or are you?
Yeah, we can do that.
We can do that until we'll just go until we're done with all 10 points and we've discussed them.
Okay. David, anything on this one?
I think Chandler and George covered it pretty well, to be honest. I ain't got anything to add. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Number 6, need to take all of the credit. So when someone does something good, they want to feel like that they get to take all the credit for that good deed.
Yeah, well, I couldn't have done this show without you guys, but I am the main guy here.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This whole thing about credit is, I'm like, here's how I look at it. Like, I don't care about credit. I don't really care so much about getting credit in the sense of a psychological thing. I mean, I'm glad that I get paid money from my job for what I do. Credit's useless. Money, I can use it to buy food. I don't get anything out of credit, so I don't have that need.
All right. Although again, I believe that the free will belief is so much more harmful than it is helpful. This is again another instance where a lot of people see it as kind of like, based on a fairness. In other words, like I think there's this kind of like common conception that like in any kind of a job and stuff, there are 20% of people who do 80% of the work and stuff, and like you're at a job environment where like you're doing things, and like let's say there's 10 people up for a promotion and it's just 1 slot and all. So there's a kind of like competition for that slot. So this is again another kind of pragmatic thing that like people want, to have this concept of credit in order to justify fairness. If you do something better than others, you put more time into it, then it kind of makes sense that if there's a reward to be had, that reward should go to you. And again, this doesn't necessarily have to include free will, like we understand, but I think in most people's minds, that distinction is subtle and not really recognized.
Yeah, I think, George, in the business world, where credit actually does translate into more money, it's a little bit more difficult. In that case, people do want credit for things so that the boss will promote them and that sort of stuff. So I think it applies there. But in everyday interpersonal relationships, credit and blame are non-existent for me. But I can see how I would want, at a job, I would want them to recognize me for the hard work I do, because that does translate to more money.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all falls back down to the whole egotism type thing. So back to the other one that we talked about earlier, it kind of falls back down to a sense of self-importance, and when you have that sense of self-importance, then you kind of look for credit where wherever you can. So.
Yeah.
And the idea that you don't have free will, kind of people might reject it based on that, that the idea that they think that they're losing some of that credit.
Yeah, and one thing that's common to all these points, Trick, that you've written here is people don't reject determinism or indeterminism. The reason that people reject the idea that they don't have a free will is not because they have an issue with its truth, because I think deep down they know it's true, but they don't like the implications of it. So that's why they try to deny it.
Right, exactly.
David, you got anything to say about that?
Bringing it back to the idea of taking credit for something. There was a quote by a guy called Thomas Cooley that I found a couple of days ago. He says, "I am not who you think I am. I am not who I think I am. I am who I think you think I am." And I think that's kind of in reference to how we define ourselves, or how we're influenced to define ourselves in social terms, and we put ourselves in assumed social responsibilities and stuff like that. And you've got to think like 1 in 5 suicides being linked to unemployment at the moment. And so it's a kind of, if you can't take credit for getting a good job and getting a good career behind you, then that can really have an impact on your mental health as well. And I think that's all kind of related to the idea that we believe in free will. Well, not us, but other people believe in free will.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying is that it's very important to us how other people see us. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, you want them to be giving you credit, so you can kind of pat yourself on the back and feel like you're doing a good job and you're worth, however much you're being paid, or whatever other credit you're getting from it.
Yeah, and it's probably good for people to not get their sense of self-worth from how much money they're making, because that really doesn't work if you're poor.
Yeah, that would be good.
Since we're talking about money, our number 7 is wealth. Some people who accumulate a certain degree of wealth may find it hard to swallow that the idea that they don't really deserve, especially on the excessive end, the wealth that they accumulate, especially if it's above, so much more above everybody else that there's an imbalance. People want to think that they deserve that above other people.
That's going to be one of our greatest challenges, because people who control the media are generally people who have a lot of money and basically use that money to influence society. And so we're going to have to come up with ways to convince them to promote this unfree will belief that seem much more salient and important than their personal life and all.
Yeah, basically, George, what we have to do is we can't outcompete the free will crowd with money. They've got more money. So it's got to be the truth, the logic, and the happiness gained from the no free will understanding that we have to promote that will be more important to people than money.
Which could be tough to do, definitely.
Yes, that'll be very tough to do in this world.
Should we move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
All right.
Yeah.
Number 8, hatred and anger. Many people hold anger or hatred or some type of grudge towards other people, and as soon as they recognize that they don't have free will, they have to kind of justify those emotions that they're having in some way, and people don't like that. They don't like to have to justify the grudge that they hold over other people.
Yeah, in psychology, anger is defined generally as a reaction against a perceived injustice. It may not be an actual injustice, but the person perceives that something is happening is unfair. And I think when a person is confronted with a situation like that, they kind of like are looking for a target. That, again, this goes back to the idea of accountability. There has to be somebody who's quote unquote held responsible for this injustice, so it could be like, remedied or repaired. But unfortunately, I guess, yeah, the free will belief just moves beyond that to then focusing on, the evil of the act, and again, the needing to counter that with hatred. I think religion often, even though they say they don't, they teach people to hate, people who do things wrong. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's that idea that they stay angry and hate people, and I guess for some reason it makes them feel better in some way to be angry at people, but it doesn't feel good for me.
I'd say that sometimes they may feel that they're hating someone, or just pushing their hate towards someone is a good thing. They might feel that it's helping someone change in some way. So if you take, for example, like the fat shaming or fat hating, you could kind of see where they think that they're doing the fat people a favor, because apparently they feel that if they shame fat people, or if they hate fat people enough, then fat people will start losing weight and they'll become healthier, and they'll live longer.
So they think.
Yeah,
So they think. So what you're saying, David, is they think that hating fat people will make them less fat.
Right. Yeah. I've actually had this explained to me by people on YouTube. So,
well, I think there's a difference between having real anger and using kind of like an angry attitude
for the sake of changing somebody's position or something like that. I think when we have the real anger, that's kind of when the problem sets in, because there's really no justification for that. But there could technically be a justification for applying what seems to be an angry attitude or something like that towards another for the sake of changing a future thing. So
it's
excellent point.
So it's actually not always necessarily because they hate them, but they actually are wanting to help them, and they come across as hateful the way they act and the way they speak.
Exactly, and I think the problem comes when people have the real anger. When they're really angry at somebody, they're not just doing some kind of guise of anger to cause something. They're actually really angry at the person or hate them. So.
Yeah, I think, like, again, when dealing with toddlers, you might want to pretend that like you're angry at the toddler for doing something, but like, a lot of parents will just like also let the toddler know that they're not really angry. So absolutely.
Yeah, that's important.
Okay, let's move on to number 9, the feeling that we are contained selves. The feeling that we have this I is a powerful feeling. It's hard to imagine that what we perceive as a self really extends outward to all these other variables, all these other events that make up our body and consciousness. That what we perceive within our mind is really influenced by everything around us. It's that we actually extend outward throughout the universe. We don't just extend to our physical body itself.
Yeah. And that's a very important point, Trick, because here's how I look at it is that, like I'm one with the universe, sort of like that, realizing that everything that even makes up my physical body literally came from a sperm and an egg and everything I've eaten since. So there's that. But then most people, they want to believe in a self that's a mind that's them, a spirit or a soul, a mind that's just them, that exists independently from the body. And what's interesting about that is, people believe that that's one thing, but it's still causal. What that mind believes, what that mind supposedly chooses is still causal. It has to stem from prior causes.
Right. So basically our mind, whatever we're thinking at any given time, is really a product of everything around us, including the people we talk to, including so it's just a product of everything that we interact with.
Yes,
But
Yeah.
people don't want to see that. They want to see themselves as something kind of bottled up as something special
It's almost
beyond that.
it's almost like they want to be a domino apart from the train of dominoes or something. And like that they think that they're a domino that exists apart from the train, and that they can fall when they choose to, and that no other domino has pushed them.
Yeah, and again, I think this may have a cultural influence in that, like in the East, like in Russia and other parts of the world, they're more collectivist in their attitude toward themselves and others. In other words, like we here in the West are very individualistic, so that's going to like feed into that desire to just like just or that perception of being separate from other people and everything else.
Yeah.
I think I made my quote too early, didn't I? I should have put the quote in now.
Put the what in?
You've already forgotten my quote. Look at the quote from Thomas Kuhn.
Oh yes, exactly. That's perfect for this. Yeah.
Yeah, too bad. Never mind. You can edit that in later.
Yeah. Okay,
Right.
so I guess number 10's next.
Yep, the final one. Thinking that free will is needed for morality. The idea that without free will, morality falls apart is a common idea. It's something that a lot of people think is the case, and it's usually due to a conflation between morality and moral responsibility, meaning someone being responsible for acting immoral or something like that. So, what do you guys think about that one?
That's powerful.
Yeah. Well, here's what's interesting is that I guess I look at that claim and I think of that as saying, well, that belief in Santa Claus is required for morality. It really seems like that way. Just like there are people who say that, you have to believe in a God to be moral. And I think when it gets into morality, it's not a very strong case to use against free will. Not to the no free will thing. Not that anything really is a strong case in defense of free will. But what I'm saying here is once you get into morality, well, then you have the problem that there's certain people that believe divine command theory and something like that, which is inherently free will based, like that God freely chooses. God wakes up and commands, well, murder is okay today, so it's moral because God said so. So that's part of the problem. Whereas, guys like us, like all of us, I think on this podcast, we view morality as, we seek pleasure and avoid pain. The hedonic imperative sort of is underneath our sense of what morality is. And I think that since we're hardwired to do that, and we don't like to feel pain ourselves, and so we avoid causing pain to others, unless of course we believe in free will and think they deserve it. Well, then we can be highly moral without a free will. Once you look at it in those terms.
That I think is the problem. Many people fear that, like, they don't recognize the distinction that that basically we need to hold people accountable even though we don't have a free will. People fear that, well, if everybody thinks we don't have a free will, then it would be unfair to hold people accountable. In a certain sense, they're right. It's unfair that the universe made them do that, and it's unfair that they have to be punished. But in terms of like basically there's part of our society already does this very effectively. Basically within the mental health system, whether it's in hospitals or in prisons for the criminally insane, whatever, there's not an attitude among professionals there that these people are responsible, because I think there's an understanding that there's some kind of like biological, neurochemical, some kind of an illness that's causing their, aberrant behavior, but nonetheless they're held responsible again because of this reward punishment thing and the need to maintain order and civilization, and they recognize it's not about free will, it's simply about maintaining order.
Yeah. And what it really comes down to is that we can't take the credit for if we're more moral than somebody else. That's not what it's about. It's about For me, it's, you know, the whole concept of treating others as you want to be treated is that's supposed to spread, is that there is sort of a karma that goes on, not a religious sense, Hinduism or anything, but just that if you treat people well, they're going to like you and they're going to treat you well. And that everyone starts treating everybody nicer. And so it's a whole utilitarian thing of the way we treat people. So that's where I think we can maintain order, where for the most part, people aren't being hurt and everyone feels like they are accepted, and you know what I'm saying? Like,
yep.
We can live in peace, basically.
And matter of fact, you bring up utilitarianism. That's probably the one ethical or moral system that is actually compatible with the no free will thing, where there's a lot of when you get into the philosophy of morality, there's a lot of systems out there that kind of require the notion of free will. so yeah. Like Kantian ethics and things like that, they all require that you have some sort of free will, and that's, I think that a lot of people, especially in the philosophical community, might find problematic. So
yeah, and that's the thing, Trick, because I've read some in your book, Breaking the Free Will Illusion. I read, you know, about different theories of morality, and I'm looking forward to your book about ethics too, because there are only certain ethical theories that are compatible with the understanding that we don't have free will, because a lot of them are free will based and therefore are automatically just wiped off the chessboard for people like us.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the title of that is gonna be something like causal ethics. That's, I think, what I want to call it. So,
sounds pretty good.
David?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Penn Jillette, he said something along the lines of, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in God and I murder people as much as I want to, which is never. And I think that's the same for free will, basically. It's just like a social contract that we happen to be influenced into, and that's where we get whatever it is we get and what we put into society. So
yeah. And realizing that we're all part of one universe and that we're all interrelated shows that hurting one member really just damages the group. And so basically a selfish person under that understanding will be moral because their self includes others. It's actually interesting because one thing I had brought up and that we might want to do in a future podcast, it is the objective versus subjective morality, because there's so much confusion over that. People saying, "Oh, well, that's just your opinion that that's right or that's wrong." And
yeah, those words themselves have major problems because they're so ambiguous in regards to semantics. So
yeah, and it's kind of a weird thing, Trick, because I've looked up the word objective. I've looked it up on some online dictionaries, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. Like, one definition is like, you know, it's not dependent on something else. I'm like, what are you talking about? Everything is dependent on something else. So there's no objective anything if it's defined that way. So when people talk about an objective morality, well, objective from, you know, yeah, I don't know. And then subjective, like, a lot of people are relativists, like, oh, well, it's all just opinion. Oh, well, it's wrong to rape people. Well, oh, that's just your opinion. You know, and so I guess that bothers me. So we'll definitely want to cover that in another podcast about
I'd like to talk about that. I don't know how it relates to the free will topic so much. Maybe we can do one of those other podcasts that you were talking about before.
Yeah, well, actually, it does relate to free will, Trick, and I just want to quickly mention that if we are not the first causers of our thoughts and feelings about morality, then how can you say that it's just our opinion, that we just self-chose of our free will to have an opinion? And so there has to be something that transcends our opinions, that our opinions came from. So it's heavily free will related, I think.
Okay. Well, we can get into it in this podcast then.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you think, George? I think that's pretty much it, right? So we covered all.
Yeah, it's excellent. Awesome.
Yeah, we covered all 10 of Trick's points, and we got to talk a little bit about each of them. So that's really good. So
I
Yeah.
did note that there was other points, like, obviously the whole religious thing I didn't put in here. That's probably a big one. A lot of people.
Oh God,
are
they're afraid they're going to
taught-
go to hell if they disbelieve in free will.
Oh yeah,
Well, exactly.
that's the big one.
They're just taught free will by pastors and things
Trick,
like that.
you should do another blog post on just exclusively the religious regions because those are major. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll want to do this more often. We'll want to read Trick's blog posts because he's got so much on his blog about this. It's definitely cool for us to do this.
Yeah, it's funny. I make a lot of my blog posts so when I'm debating people, I can point to them, so I don't have to rehash the same arguments over and over and over.
Very cool.
Yeah. And it's very good, and that gives me a link I can put in the description of these when I upload them.
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah, we're almost at 46 minutes. Any final comments before we close it?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Well, you've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs, George Ortega, Trick Slattery, and David Joseph, and we covered all 10 of Trick Slattery's points about why people, it's hard for them to give up their belief in free will. And so I plan on putting the link to that post when I upload this podcast. And we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.